I'd like to welcome our wonderful cable television audience, which, by the way, I should add, according to all the demographics and my own observation, very attractive, highly educated, and of course, above all, extremely generous. Although now that, for those of you, I understand that in such a position that some of you cannot join in with the fiscal contributions, I'm sure the way you'd like, who have been sending me in lieu of that nude photographs of yourself. I do appreciate it, except for some of you men with real hairy thighs. Perhaps you'd like to, save it for your closer friends or family. And also, the audience, the other piece of business. Any of you who are planning, I want to give you time. We're planning to come to where we're doing the tapings. It's the first 2 weeks of October. I wanted to mention we will be going from here in Bergen over to Oslo for 2 weeks to be filming. I didn't want any of you to make plans, so you can catch us there. And here we go. I feel like I'm in Chicago. Either that, or if you want obscure humor, either that or Lou Rawls is breathing down my neck. Here we go. Send me $1 and I'll write you out what that meant. Or send me $2 and I'll tell you the truth. Well, it should cost more, come to think of it. I can't believe it. Somebody requested number 1. The band, or somebody play a chord. Here we go. I can't believe I've never dealt with number 1. And Kyroots said, the human mind is like a wondrous, agile kite. Safely secured, however, directed and protected by a ponderous chain composed of hormones, enzymes, reptilian desires, and other gooey stuff. I will assume that somebody wanted to hear it, because that's got to be explanatory. What else can I tell you? It is. If you want to take the picturization, I'll give Kyroots some credit. To think about the mind, above all else that we might ordinarily observe on this planet, the freedom that people, besides you and I, have already years ago rhapsodized, poetricized about the freedom, the agility, the ability of the human mind. But think about a kite compared to everything else. Not even earthbound, except it's not earthbound in the ordinary sense, but a kite, you understand, has got to have some anchor to it. It's got to be secured in some way. There's got to be some controller. It'd be gone. You'd be insane if you don't carry it any further. That would be an insane person. Would be a human mind. You say, that's still like a kite, and somebody cut their string. So you got to have some kind of connection to earthly, mundane, carnal, everyday affairs. And Kyroots points out that it starts out as a kind of, I think he meant it as a interesting, thought-provoking juxtaposition, that the mind is a wondrous, agile kite, and then he compares it in the next line, safely secured, directed, and protected by a ponderous, think about it, not a string, a chain. And in the third line, he points out what the chain consists of, which I'm sure you've already memorized or written down. Well, for your own personal use. Hormones, enzymes, and leftover, still extant reptilian desires. For all of you who think just because you managed to get through the University of North Carolina that you lost those lizard tastes. No, not hardly. I've seen some of you, that even one or two of you I know for a fact, actually graduated and had a BA degree, and I have seen you walk past newsstands in front of a penthouse or something. Look just like Godzilla or Liz Zillard. And here we're talking about people who had a good 4 solid years, assuming they actually was legit, of college. Page 2. Although I don't think Kyroots mentioned it to the readers, there is a certain, may I suggest, nexus between page 1 and 2. Page 2 in Kyroots said, since man's actual history cannot be faced, he has come up with the idea of a study known as history. May I suggest to you again, since we suggest a lot, that this is not simply a play on words, but consider what is history. And we're not picking on the discipline of history. It's history all the way from what seems to be your personal memory, which is of very limited consequence. But if you consider what seems to be the collective, the genetic, not just the written and academic, but the full spectrum of human history, the importance thereof, the significance that all literate people say, yes, we must learn from history. Where else are we going to learn from? Kyroots says, in a sense, to change the sense around, that men made up the idea of history since they can't face what history is. You understand that? It's not just beating around on words and trying to come up with some kind of crude non sequitur. It's that since men cannot face, okay, from you Tar Heels, you beach dancer devils, beach music, since men cannot face the history that is man, then what do? They make up another history. Well, what if man's history, without me doing it for you, think about the yuckiest possible history man could have. I'm sure most of you won't take but a second. Okay. Now, compare that with what perhaps your own background at the city level, your own culture, religion, etc. Well, let's take the Western JC tradition, Judaic-Christian, that I guess they claim it does. It sounds bad, the story of the downfall of man from the Garden of Eden. But now all of you will assume some imagination that 2 or 3 minutes ago when I said, think about the yuckiest possible background for man. And if you can't do it your own, at least I made it sound too much like trying to get you to consider that our forefathers were all those mass Texas chainsaw murderers out of slasher movies. How about just the idea of the good old straightforward Freudian coming out of the sea? To forget about Adam and Eve being real dumb, or at least real pushy, arrogant, short-sighted, and got us in this trouble to where you have to work and go to church and temple and all that. Consider the other alternative. Instead of Adam and Eve and them being your questionable progenitors, think of all these slimy slugs and eels. You understand? So pick out the worst thing you consider to be the history of man. And consider it's possible. Now do you see what the Kyroots meant? Since man's actual history cannot be faced. I guess I beat around the bush too much. I am telling you, it was a close one last week where Kyroots was pointing out how psychology came about. That men invented psychology just real quick. In fact, Kyroots said almost out of nothing. In fact, he didn't say almost, he said out of nothing. As soon as men realized where the combined study of biology and chemistry was going, suddenly men realized, wait a minute. And there is one tonight, I don't know when we get to it, that one fellow was saying that he didn't find it all that curious or surprising or astounding how ordinary, civilized, sane men, otherwise sane and civilized men, could take the notion of holy books and believe that somebody other than humans, that the idea is that they came from somewhere other than the human mind. He said he was astounded, that he wasn't astounded by that. Which you could take that off yourself, that it is kind of astounding. Wait a minute, you're an intelligent person. I mean, I've been living here with you. I've been riding in the bus with you, and I thought you were kind of straightforward and relatively sane. Yes, I am. And yet you think, because you think that this actually, that the guides wrote this book here, whichever one you hold up. And that person says, yes, I do. You can take your own view. That's not where I was going to stop, because all of you should have some understanding of that. This guy is pointing out that he doesn't find that astounding. What he finds astounding, that it took man so long to come up with the thing. Which, of course, you don't know how long it took man, but since I've already suggested twice tonight, how about I suggest, based upon that Kyroot, that it took, well, more than a few minutes. Maybe a few hours, a few weeks, that humans could actually, of course, they were not actually alive to be humans until they could think and talk. Then there were humans. And the suggestion, I think, within the Kyroot is that they did not, just a split second after they could talk, went, God damn, quick, write a holy book so we'll know what the hell we're doing. So we're assuming just perhaps because of physical, logistical limitations, confines, requirements, that it may have taken weeks, months, Of course, it could, based on ordinary history, it could have taken, if you're going to start going by those so-called cave paintings and other remnants of man in antiquity, then there could have been thousands of years that men seemed to be, from all the artifacts and archaeological evidence, that man had been around for a long time, more than a couple of hours, more than a couple of weeks, perhaps thousands of years, and very likely had some kind of communication. Very likely their brain was operating somewhat, well, similar, maybe if we're going to use today's requirements, somewhere close to maybe a salesman. But perhaps it was going on for many, many years before the first holy book showed itself. So this guy says what amazes him is that. Now, did you lose your place? Back to page 2. Moving right along, backwards. Since man's history cannot be faced, I was going to tell you I was going to quit beating around the bush. Men cannot face their history. And it's not because of stupidity. It's not because of anything easily explained. Those of you who can understand some of it already should have a whiff. Was what the hint was last time with the Kyroots, saying that as soon as men realized where the combined study of biology and chemistry was going, suddenly they thought, wait a minute, hold the presses, I got a new flash. Why don't we, wait a minute, I know it's important and all that, why don't we investigate psychology? You become Joyce Brothers and I'll get a job. That is the refusal, except refusal is not the word. I told you there is no word. Man cannot face, it is the machine itself, or the mind cannot turn on itself and go, who was that? That's how it can't face it. So when it says that since man's actual history cannot be faced, it's not simply that there's some kind of terrible history that man can't bear to see. It's not that history, that man's background is so far removed, so complex that man's too dumb to see it. All that may be true, but that's not the point. He cannot face it for that reason. For the same reason that men will never invent, concoct, fabricate, erect, construct a so-called thinking machine that's as smart as he is. Forget smarter than he is. Of course, there's a Kyroot in there that anybody who believes they can invent a machine smarter than they can probably can. but trust me, if they can, who cares? I mean, you're not going to have much. It is, well, no, a man's shadow cannot see the soles of his feet. There are absolute limitations to what 2D intelligence, which is what we're talking about the history of man, can do. There's only so far it can turn around. It's like having a very small garage to stay in 3 dimensions. A very small garage, and you've got like a 38-foot stretch limo. And the garage was made for a Volkswagen. There's simply no way you can do it. The history of man is, literally, you're going to see the back of your head, right? I'll invent a machine, yes. Wait a minute, I will channel. You mean you're going to swim all the way to France? No, I'll go into a trance and spirits will tell me where we came from, right? Yeah, a holy book. I'm surprised it took people so long. Because there is no history that man can face up to. What's the closest he gets? It always has been religious books. Because God said this the way it was. He said that we all came from some spores of rutabagas carried here on a cosmic wind, or whatever they say. And as long as you are going along with that story, then nobody can say, well, that's ridiculous. You can say, well, you're obviously not one of us. Well, no. Well, we wouldn't expect you to understand. And so there you are. Since man's actual history cannot be faced, we've come up with the idea of a study known as history. Those of you that like a senior version, so that we can get to page 4, put it this way. Since men cannot ordinarily be intelligent, they have come up with the idea of being what? Intelligent. Educated. And in fact, some men can be so intelligent that they'll admit, yes, I'm dumb. I don't know who they're waiting to argue with them. Oh, no, you're not. Well, I guess you work for the guy, or your brother-in-law, and he owes you money. I'm just the old stupido. Oh, no, you're not. No. Yeah, I am. No, you're not. Yeah, I am. Don't push it. And Kyroots encouraged. I like the way Tim did. And Kyroots encouraged, encouraged. Anyway, if you pretend to be unconscious, you may be able to become so. It's good to have little words of inspiration peppered in amongst all of this. As that one woman said, sometimes she looks at the show and thinks he should be ashamed of himself. Are we going to get to that one? Everybody asks. And the man says that he nods his agreement until they both think about it. And they don't know why they say that. It just seems right. And Kyroots said, the addition of just one more dimension will explain everything and answer all questions. There is another line here, but that is it. That is, in fact, if you want another definition, that is revolutionist thinking. To be able to literally add another dimension. Then everything that people want to say that they want to understand, if they could do it. The answer to all questions, the ability to go in a certain way. You do understand what I meant by this. It's impossible. You're never going to see the back of your head unless you could add a dimension. And then you can. But, you can go to Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and you will never be able to go. You can go to MIT. You can do anything you want to. You can pursue spiritual lines, metaphysical lines, scientific lines. But to know the history of man, to know what's going on, you've got to be able to go. And you literally cannot do it. Spatially, you cannot do it. Except, as Kyroots said on page 9, the addition of just one more dimension will explain everything and answer all questions. Okay, and a gentleman says, I still think it's easier just to be religious or wait until the package store is open. Very funny, sir, very funny. You look like a Swede to me. That's like a Swede's handwriting. And Kyroots said, it's one of these double-barreled. A lot of you seem to get it. I'll reread it. It just has a subtle change. And Kyroots said, from one perspective, the only bar to suicide is secondary seriousness. And Kyroots said, then from another view, the only bar to secondary suicide is seriousness. And you can take your juicy choice. I agree with you. Nothing to be said, nothing to add to that. Except to call for the head of the man who actually continues to write the ads for Wrigley's. In case you don't know it, it's one of the family members, in case you never figured out. God almighty. I didn't know that Kmart had an advertising department. It's part of the Wrigley family, so I finally heard. But on top of that, it must work. They got more money than we got. They're filming their things in New York and L.A. They're not having to move to Norway to get out of it. Like over here with us, freezing our... Okay, Miss Kyroots received this inquiry. Dear Miss Kyroots, why is it that there are people who would genetically dance together, but then who wouldn't even speak to each other once they're off the ballroom floor? And she twisted her hair and somebody thought she was heard to mumble sort of to herself that on top of that, she was wondering why there were the two worlds of the secondary and the primary to start with. I wonder how Miss Lee would look with dreadlocks. Come to think about it, I wonder how the... And Kyroots offered up another of those Rebels insider tips. If you know just how to do it, spitting in the wind, everybody knows that term. It's in quotation, spitting in the wind. Everybody says, don't spit in the wind. Of course, that's one of those things that you think, all right, that's true. But if I knew somebody so stupid I had to tell them to spit in the wind, what does that say about me? What kind of friends have I? Well, at any rate, Kyroots points out if you know just how to do it, spitting in the wind, coming to a positive, can actually increase the amount of wind. But a guy comes around the corner and he says, is this why? Now I know this is tricky, but it is connected. Trust me. Guy says, is this why ordinary people have so often been cautioned about blasphemy against the gods? What if it turned out? Anybody see a connection between just the ordinary? I'm not attacking what throughout history, as long as you've had it, they've always been saying, do not, there's a such thing as blasphemy. We've got super forces, and they're normally known as the gods. Don't be insulting. Don't be blasphemous. Don't go against them. Don't go against their will. Don't go against what the priests and everybody's told us they will. Does anybody see a connection between blasphemy against the gods and what's normally called spitting in the wind, and then get beyond the two, somewhere between the normal and the abnormal, remember, put them all together, and consider that spitting in the wind not only could be seen as not being a self-defeating act, could actually be profitable, not just you, but might increase the amount of wind available. I don't know. I started to say something about religious, but since I've been defrocked, the state said that they don't mind you practicing law once you've been disbarred. But boy, once they take away your collar, you'd be, I guess the important matters. There was a conversation here that was done, that I guess maybe if she did a good job reading it, didn't say man one and man two, but it's a conversation here. First guy says, words themselves are just a metaphor for the real thing. The other guy says, you mean the things they represent? Which Jesus, that would seem to be the obvious answer. Of course, that would seem to be so crude and unoriginal that if that was the answer, I would have left. But it's not. First guy says, words themselves are just metaphors for the real thing. And the other guy says, the things themselves. And the first guy says, no. The guy says, well, then what? And the guy says, think about it. And so sometime later, then the other guy comes back and he says, all right, I thought about, maybe this is it. And he quotes the first guy to pick it up, and he says, all right, words themselves are just metaphors for the real thing. That is, and the real thing is the real words. That's too spooky for me. Oh, wait a minute, if there's real words, why would you have to have metaphors to begin with? I said it was too spooky. A man's brain asked him, why can't I do better? And the man replied, don't ask me, go ask your mother. And Kyroots added a note. A man who really knows who his mother is knows a lot. But then Kyroots confessed, in fact, this by itself is more info than an ordinary man requires. May I refer you back to, I think, page 4 or page 2. Inasmuch as since man cannot face his own history, he has to concoct the idea of history. But a man says, I know who my mother is. Well, sure you know who your mother is. Well, I guess you do, but I would assume that some of you would suspect the big M word, actually the big S word. It is symbolic. What if a man actually knew something about his own history? Back to we hadn't mentioned it lately, one of those great dangers always lurking around from the caves of France to the ruins in Egypt, saying, know thyself. And men still, their brains, when they talk to their brains like this guy did on page 37, that a man's brain asked him, as people think, yes, if I knew myself, I'd know it all. One of the grand, for those of you who don't remember, Kyroots recently pointed out that it is not true that all the good illusionists died with Houdini. No. As it's known in the fine profession of prestidigitators, people like Houdini, Blackstone, known at least among Southern magicians, were slow walkers. The real magician is somebody else. The real magician has pulled one of the great ones of believing, or making men believe, if I knew myself, I would know it all. It is almost, perhaps I didn't lead on that enough, now that I think about it. All of you have heard it, and it strikes, it is such a devilishly clever that it strikes almost anyone that even has the slightest potential to ever try and think originally, to think for themselves, be anything resembling a revolutionist. Throughout history, is to tell them the main thing is to know yourself. Forget going to universities, forget going around the world. You've got you to study. Study you. And even today, put in that most direct form, it will make people go, Jesus, is that the truth or what? And they do not realize that it's then only one small step. It's like you start to dance with this great idea, and before you know it, you have been... Someone has cut in. It's religion, and even of greater significance now, and of a certain more subtle beauty, at least more up-to-date and fashionable, psychology, psychiatry. That, that is important. That if I knew myself, God, what would be possible? In limited time, without me trying to pull it apart, it is so beautiful because it just at first blush, real superficially, there's almost something to it. But the depth of it, can you see the edge of the paper? The depth of it, I don't know, makes that look fat, I guess. Overweight. If I knew myself. And it sounds just so right, because at first you think, well, if I knew myself, in some way I'd get into my own genetic patterns, perhaps, or in some way I could communicate. That's hard to argue with that, except notice this. Is that where you ended up? I don't want to talk about it. Well, you never thought about it. It's the same thing, if it's getting too obscure here then. Going into analysis. Trying to talk to somebody, trying to spill your guts, which is, simply whining and paying for the privilege. It serves it as a useful purpose in life. It is part of the city's recovery programs. But anyone who would ever be a revolutionist has got to be able to just simply feel it, that it is a cul-de-sac of a hobby. It has almost nothing to do with this. Well, it has as much as, I don't know, probably having your car repainted. That the attempted study of oneself is still a kind of attempt to do this and never realize what you're doing. But it sounds right. That yes, that is the most important thing. If I knew me, and it just sounds undeniably correct. Except if you pursue that under the ordinary view, all you got to do is ask yourself, if you have any doubt about this, if this helps at all, after you've studied yourself, maybe individually, maybe with the help of others, maybe with professional help, maybe a large group of originally driven, metaphysically driven, unusually driven fellow travelers along such an intellectual, spiritual line, that you all get together and try it. If somewhere along the line it struck you, if you could ask yourself, all right, I feel like that I'm making some progress. Of course, if you've been working at it for 10 years and you ask yourself, or your mother or somebody says, are you getting anywhere with that? We all know what the answer is. You got to say, yeah. Either that or start bouncing around the screen like Daffy Duck off the wall. So you have to say, well, yes. Of course, in your intellectual humility, you say, well, no, I have not fully arrived. I'm sure there probably, without any doubt, there's still crevices, recesses in my soul, of which I have yet to shine in the light of objective consciousness. And your mother thinks, Jesus, is he back on drugs? But anyway, it is the kind of humility, it is the kind of show of intelligence by admitting that, yes, I'm still stupid. But even you would think, yes, I have had some progress. And if I could suddenly, or you could jump out of your own brain and say, all right, tell me this then. You've been studying and you've studied with others, you've been in analysis, you've been with gurus, you've been with other people attempting to study yourself, and you get together and you whine, you cry, You admit your worst dreams. You'll drop your pants and show that, yes, I do wear my sister's underwear at times, or whatever your worst nightmare is. And that's all right. Are you getting any better about knowing yourself and what should be its full spiritual, intellectual, personal culmination? Are you closer? Don't worry where you're there. Are you closer? And you go, yes. That's all right. After all this study, or you speak to you, after all this study, and you getting a better handle on who you are, just who you are, how much of what you are has been influenced by your life and your environment? And you go, well, I hate to tell you, kiddies, you have, I'm being crude, of course, you have wasted whatever amount of time you did. It was a hobby, but to think, well, I am getting closer. So you do understand yourself some better. Yes, probably not much, but some better. All right. How much has it changed when you start out your idea of how much influence your actual upbringing had on you, and the environment and your education? And you had some feeling for that when you started. Well, yes. Well, how much has it changed, like the balance between whatever genetic shortcomings, frailties you may have had, compared to the kind of psychological traumas that you've experienced postpartum? And if you go, I'm sorry, sir, the bus has taken off with you. Have no fear, you have not missed the bus. The bus is going nowhere. As they say in some circles, you is the bus. Did anybody understand all that? I know I didn't. Sure you did. Now we have no time, so you don't have to worry about whether you understand it. Remember, the first 2 weeks in October, we will be taping in Oslo instead of Bergen, then we'll be back in case any of you won't come in. And don't forget, the Baltic Sea is not actually a sea. See? It wasn't much of an ending, was it? If it's true, who cares? Well, come to think of it, I bet